Welcome to the Explainer. So today, we're going to tackle a question that sounds super simple, but the answer, well, it's surprisingly complex. Who really pays for tariffs? You're about to find out that the answer might be a lot closer to home than you think.
You've definitely heard about tariffs in the news, right? I mean, over the last couple of years, the US has been putting taxes on imported goods at levels we really haven't seen since the 1930s. We're talking rates on some goods, say from China, that have just soared past 100%. And this brings up a huge, billion-dollar question that seems pretty straightforward on the surface. When the government slaps a tax on foreign goods, who's actually on the hook for that bill? As we're about to see, the answer is way more complicated, and frankly, a lot closer to home than you might think.
Okay, let's dive into this. First, we'll look at who physically pays the tax right at the port. Then, we're going to follow that cost as it kind of snakes its way through the economy. We'll also uncover some of these hidden price tags you don't actually see on the shelf. And finally, we'll zoom out and look at the big picture impact on the entire country. So, first things first, let's get the simple administrative answer out of the way. When that tariff bill comes due, who is legally required to pay it?
While the process itself is crystal clear, when goods land at a U.S. port, it's a domestic company, what's known as the importer of record, that is legally responsible. This American company pays the tariff directly to U.S. Customs, often before the products are even released for sale. And get this, there is simply no process for a foreign company to pay this tax directly to the U.S. government.
You know, for a huge retailer, this is just a line item on a spreadsheet, but for a small business, it's a full-blown crisis. Take Beth Bannock, the owner of a company called Busy Baby. When tariffs spiked, she got hit with this massive, unexpected bill just to get her products into the country. She couldn't afford it. She had to halt production and literally liquidate her personal retirement savings just to keep her business afloat. So the very first person who pays is an American entrepreneur.
But the story doesn't stop there, not even close, because where the money starts its journey is not where it ends up. Just because a U.S. importer writes the check doesn't mean they're the ones who ultimately carry the final cost.
Now, in economic theory, there's this idea called the terms of trade hypothesis. The gist is that a country with a massive market, like the US, should have the leverage to basically force foreign companies to lower their prices to absorb that new tax, just so they can stay competitive and keep selling to American customers.
So, that's the theory. But what happens in the real world? Well, there's a mountain of economic research on the recent tariffs, and it tells a very, very different story. The data shows that foreign exporters just haven't been lowering their prices. For the most part, they've held firm, leaving the U.S. importer holding the bag for the entire cost of the tariff.
And this is where the hard data is really interesting. Research from the National Bureau of Economic Research is pretty decisive on this. They found what they call near-unity pass-through. Now, that's just a fancy way of saying that for every single dollar of tariffs imposed, the cost to the U.S. economy goes up by, well, $1. The cost isn't being paid by foreign exporters, it's being absorbed almost 100% right here in the US.
And this is a brilliant way to understand why you don't always see prices jump the day a tariff is announced. Think about it like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. Retailers, the importers, they try to hold those prices down by taking a hit on their own profits, but they can only absorb that pressure for so long before that ball, or in this case consumer prices, shoots right to the surface.
So the cost you pay isn't always obvious. It doesn't just show up as a higher number on a price tag. Tariffs have these subtler, almost more insidious ways of reaching into your wallet and, affecting your life.
Big retailers, they all have different playbooks for dealing with these costs. You've got Walmart saying, hey, price hikes are pretty much unavoidable. Target tries to move its supply chains around, but admits price hikes are a last resort. But then look at a company like Columbia Sportswear. Their strategy is something called de-speccing, and it's a really sneaky way that you end up paying.
So what on earth is de-speccing? Well, it's basically reducing the quality of a product to keep the price the same. To avoid tariffs on Chinese goods, a furniture company might move production over to Vietnam. But as this one executive pointed out, the foam they use there is, well, it's lower quality. So the sofa costs the same, but you're actually getting a less durable product. That's a hidden cost.
And this gets even more serious in other industries. Take auto parts. Tariffs on steel and other components have caused prices to spike. Retailers like AutoZone and O'Reilly are reporting that everyday DIY mechanics are putting off critical repairs. We're talking about things like brakes, because they just can't afford the parts anymore. So the hidden cost here isn't just money, it's a direct threat to safety on our roads.
Okay, so here's the crucial point. When you add up all of these individual costs,
From small business owners to consumers to mechanics, it creates this massive drag on the entire U.S. economy.
Now, even though a central argument for tariffs is to protect American jobs, comprehensive studies from groups like the Tax Foundation, they paint a very different picture. They estimate that the tariffs, plus the inevitable retaliation from other countries, led to a net loss of over 500,000 full-time jobs.
And what about your wallet? Well, the Budget Lab at Yale calculated that these policies effectively act as a tax on American families, reducing the real annual income of the average household by about $1,800. That's a pretty significant drop in purchasing power.
And if we zoom out even further, these costs aren't just some temporary hit. They create a measurable, long-term drag on the nation's economic growth, slowing down our potential for prosperity well into the future.
You know, economists have a great analogy for this. They say it's like forcing the economy to run a race while wearing a weighted vest. It doesn't collapse right away, it keeps moving forward, but every single step is harder, every transaction is more costly, and over time, it just gets exhausted and it slows down. That's the drag effect of tariffs.
So, after following the money all the way from the port to the price tag to the economy at large, let's circle all the way back to our original question and put all the pieces together.
So, who pays? The answer is pretty clear. The cost of tariffs is paid almost exclusively within our own borders. U.S. importers pay that initial bill. U.S. consumers pay it through higher prices and, softer foam. U.S. workers pay through lost jobs. And U.S. taxpayers even pay again, funding bailouts for industries like agriculture that get hit hard by retaliation.
And really, that brings us to the real debate. It isn't about whether we can make other countries pay the bill. The evidence shows that's just not happening. The real question is about the price we as a country are willing to pay ourselves to achieve the goals behind these policies. It's a debate about weighing intended outcomes against their very real and very domestic costs.